Is it really important to do a value study before starting a watercolor painting? Especially a complex subject like this where lot many complex shapes are involved? How do we even start it? How does the value study even contribute to the actual painting? We shall understand all these things in this video. A good painting is always supported by a good sketch. So if you're struggling to sketch perspective in right place, I have tried to simplify it in a very easy way for you in this video, and I highly recommend that you follow along and paint from the value study to a color study. You will understand how you can simplify the complex shapes and it will significantly improve your confidence. Okay, here is our reference for today's session, and you see how detailed this particular architecture is. So many complex shapes involved, and this is also a great example of studying simple architectures in place. I have tried to explain it in a very simple way for you, what perspective basically is and how do you approach it. Typically, if you have any sort of digital tool like Procreate or Photoshop or whatever it is, you can import the photo and try to draw these guidelines. Guidelines are basically those lines which will give you an idea about the effect of foreshortening. How much a dimension is getting shorter with respect to the distance change, you will get an idea. And these guidelines will eventually meet to a fixed point. The red color guidelines I am showing here will eventually meet to a point in my extreme left, and the green color guidelines will meet to a point at my extreme right. So these 2 points are called vanishing points, and eventually they will be locating on a same line called horizon line. So these are some of the technical terms that you should be keeping in mind. But the main idea is to have the effect of foreshortening so that our dimensions are pretty much correct. And I have started with dividing the total dimension into few divisions so that I kind of get my proper scale. After that, I have started with the vertical lines. Once they are kind of constructed, I have drawn the guidelines. Once those guidelines are established, then I am trying to roughly capture the larger shapes, right? Those outer lines basically in the reference. So this should be the approach. Always from a sketch, or if we are doing a painting, I emphasize this a lot. Always first target to the larger shapes. Here also for the sketching part, we will be sketching the larger shapes first. Then we will do very minimal details whichever are necessary for us to start with the watercolor. Value study is nothing but to understand the different colors value from light to the dark. The easiest way to understand this by looking at a grayscale. It starts with a white color probably and ends with a dark gray colors. Similar way we will be approaching to understand what is my lightmost color and what is my darkmost color, and what is the simplest variation in between these two. Now there are plenty of ways to study this particular topic, and it is a broad topic as well, but we are trying to keep it very simple when it comes to the application of watercolor. And along the process I will be also sharing, and you will eventually get to know that the importance of having this value study before attempting to the actual color study. Although grayscale is the most preferred way to study this particular topic, if you want you can use any other color to kind of study the monochrome, and that will give you an idea about the values, where more values are there, where the less values are there. I am trying to use here a color blue mist, which is kind of a very cool gray color, and I'll be using that color throughout. First of all, I have mixed a big puddle of that gray color that I will be using throughout this study. It's always a good practice that you keep your color puddle always ready for a bigger area so that you don't need to mix it several times. So in this value study, I have tried to segregate the complete subject into 3 major values. The lightmost is considered as the white of the paper, and then the middle tone or the darker version, which are kind of under the shadows, I am considering as the middle tone, and the darkest tone, which or the darkest values which are under the shadows. Those intricate details we can represent or show by using that darkest tone. So 3 major values: white of the paper, then one layer of this gray color, then once everything dries up, I will be using little bit more color and less water to show those darkest tones to basically represent the detailing part of it. And I hope you have already noticed that how I am simplifying those complex shapes into a very simple shapes during this value study itself. So this basically will give you an opportunity to have or kind of your plan ready before you actually attempt to the original painting. So in this particular step itself, you know that these are my big shapes of the shadows, or this is enough, or these are the shapes which are enough to establish the entire painting that I am trying to establish, right? So this will give you additional confidence before you actually start the original painting. So there are no restrictions to this value study. You can do as many as you want, and this will basically enhance your confidence before attempting the original painting. If I say that this will give you an opportunity to get prepared for the actual painting. So I waited for some time for this area to dry out, and then I am adding the darkest tone to show some sort of detailing. And these detailings are also very rough or very simplified version. I am just painting some sort of the lines or the dots to represent those intricate details. And you can practice this as many as you want, which will give you better idea about the right depth or the right value into this painting. So once the value study is done, and this is with reference to that, I will be now moving forward to the colored part of it. So for that, I am basically mixing a color puddle, which will be my first layer, which would represent the light in this specific subject. So for the value study, I have considered white of the paper as my light. Here it has got its original color, right? So for that I am mixing slightly lighter yellow. For that I am using yellow ochre and bit of Naples yellow. And just to change the saturation little bit, I am using burnt sienna, burnt umber all together. And you notice these colors I am not mixing all of them. I am trying to keeping them separate so that I can make use of the all possible ways. Basically I can use that yellow, I can use this side of darker version of that yellow, and sometimes if I want I can just mix both of them to get some sort of in between tone. You will notice how that will be applied in going forward. This is the stage where I basically paint the original color of that object. Now that original color can be multiple, right? In nature there is no fixed color of an object. There are lots of varieties. Now in a very simple way, as much as I can capture or as much as I can see, I will try to replicate that in the first layers. This is kind of a stage at which I take freedom as an artist to exaggerate the subject a bit, so that I can make it more interesting than it appears in the photograph. Now you would notice once that particular layer is dried, now I am coming up with that next layer or the painting the shadows. Here I am continuously looking at my value study, how I have painted. So now at this stage I have already kept one copy ready of that is basically the simplified version of that original version. So I don't need to look too much at the original subject at this moment. I can basically take this value study as a reference from now onwards to paint the larger shapes of the shadows, right? Only thing I can be aware, or I need to look at the original subject, that is about the change in the saturation or change in the colors. So technically now it has become easier to me to deal with those complex shapes. I don't need to look at those complex shapes multiple times and get confused at this original painting stage. I have already done that simplified version. Now I can just replicate that simplified version into my colored version, and it will be pretty easy for me at this stage. Now what I want you to notice very carefully about the shadow part of this particular painting, apart from the shapes of the shadows, there is interesting thing about the colors, how I am changing the colors, different types of colors, right? So basically I am trying to maintain one balance between the cool and warm shadows, right? Wherever I am feeling that it needs to be added warm tone by looking at my reference, and wherever that shadows are kind of little bit inside or distance area, I can just represent that as a cooler shadows, right? So that also kind of a variation that I am trying to represent here in this. This particular layer is dried out, I can make use of the darkest color, which is a mix of Payne's Grey and burnt sienna, and create those small details. So those details are basically to represent that they are kind of farther inside the shadows, right? So they are far away from the light. And till this point you might have already noticed that how I am following or keeping my value study as a reference and painted this colored version of that. And I have already explained how it helped me to look at those complex shapes and deal with that very easily, because I had kind of my plan ready what I need to do, and I had my simplified version also ready before I start the actual painting. With this, today's session is completed. I hope you learned something new in this video, or I was able to convey the essence of having a value study before starting an watercolor. Let me know your feedback in the comment box. If you like this video, do not forget to give a thumbs up. If you're new here, please consider subscribing to this channel. I will see you with a new video next week. Till then, bye bye.